Welcome everybody to another edition of Flipped History. Our topic today is segregation and discrimination, and all of these things you can see in these pictures here: colored waiting room, we serve whites only, no Spanish or Mexicans, and the Rex Theater for colored people. All these things are going to develop in the late 19th century, and it's really going to come to a head with the decision in Plessy versus Ferguson. So our learning outcomes: you should be able to describe the different measures that were taken to disenfranchise African Americans, and when we talk about disenfranchisement, we're talking about voting. You should be able to evaluate the importance of the separate but equal doctrine and the impact that it had on the first half of the 20th century. So discrimination and violence. We are going to start this thing in 1882, and between that period and 1892, over 1,400 black people were shot, burned, or hanged in the South. And there is virtually no repercussions for this, because a lot of the people that were in the power position, whether it was a sheriff or whatever, they are probably in on it more than likely. So a lot of these Southern African Americans are going to start to move north. Not in the scale that we're going to see come towards World War I, but they're still going to try and get out of there between 1882 and 1892. There are better opportunities and a little bit more equality in the North. It's not great, but it's better than it is in the South. They at least can get jobs, and at least they're not going to get challenged for everything in the North like they would in the South. And really, as a last resort, the employees are going to be hiring African Americans, and if they are the last hired, they will certainly be the first to be fired. You can see in this picture here, help wanted, white only. A lot of companies do not want to hire any minorities, and not just African American people, but they could be Germans, it could be Italians or Polish people or anything like that. So any minority at this point is going to have a really hard time, where these native-born white Americans are the ones that are going to be feeling that they are better than everybody else. So during Reconstruction, we're going to go back a little bit here and kind of review. So first thing, many attempted to help promote the civil rights that were denied to African Americans during Reconstruction. So we have this, remember, the 13th and the 14th Amendment that were trying to help. The 13th Amendment, again, is outlawing slavery, and the 14th Amendment is any person born in the United States or naturalized is entitled to the rights of a U.S. citizen. So all these African American people should have all of the rights that anyone else has in this country. Well, in the South, it's really not going to be the case. They're going to run their own rules. And Southerners try to make their way around the Constitution in a couple of ways. The first thing they tried to do was institute a literacy test that was commonly given to African Americans. You can kind of see here, can the President of the United States be impeached? There's certain basic questions like this. This one in particular is from Alabama. The problem with these, however, is there are a lot of poor white people in the South. And with there being a lot of poor white people in the South, they are also illiterate people. So what this is also going to do, it kind of has a negative effect. It's also not just only to disenfranchise those illiterate African Americans, but it's going to disenfranchise poor white people. And the Southerners are going to find this to be problematic. So what they're going to do is get rid of the literacy test in most cases, and they're going to create what is known as a grandfather clause, which meant if your grandfather could vote, then you could too. So it helped all of those poor white people that couldn't vote with the literacy test. Now they'll be able to. However, African Americans, if their grandfather was a slave, they couldn't vote. So it was another way to disenfranchise the African American. Some other ways: you could pay a poll tax. And what the poll tax was is you had to go as you were about to vote and you had to pay a tax. This also was problematic for very poor white people. So this is why the grandfather clause is going to be so important for them. And also the Ku Klux Klan, after the end of Reconstruction, is really going to be a prominent force in the South, and it's really going to scare a lot of those African American people. Could you imagine? There's one point where 60,000 Ku Klux Klan members are marching down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. So what is really going to happen next for these people? The African Americans in the South are going to be facing what is going to come to be known as a Jim Crow South, where they are going to be restricted in just about everything that they do. The Civil Rights Act of 1875, still during Reconstruction, is supposed to give them the right to use public facilities, meaning hotels, restaurants, railroads, anything like that, waiting rooms. That's supposed to allow them to start to mix together with the white people. However, in 1883, the Civil Rights Act of 1875 is declared unconstitutional. Well, just think about it for a minute. Public facilities, we're talking about hotels, restaurants, and railroads, these things are not public. These things are not like parks. The reason that it's going to be declared unconstitutional is that these places are not public, but rather they are privately owned by individuals. The 14th Amendment is going to protect citizens from states, not from private individuals. So the 14th Amendment is going to protect African Americans from the government, but not from white private business owners. Where many people believe that this all started is in the decision of Plessy versus Ferguson. And Plessy Ferguson, you can kind of read here, you may want to pause the video, was removed from the East Louisiana Railroad train and arrested by a detective. He was 1/8 black, enough to be considered African American, 100% considered African American. So the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, 1892, he's jailed for sitting on the white train car on the East Louisiana Railroad. He's an 1/8 black, meaning he's basically a Creole for the Louisiana Standard. By Louisiana law, however, he was supposed to sit in the colored train car. He is going to argue and refuse to be moved, and ultimately was arrested. Plessy is going to appeal this all the way to the Supreme Court, and his lawyer is going to argue that the separate train car violated the 13th and the 14th Amendment. The results of this decision are really going to be detrimental to the growth of the African American population. The Supreme Court is going to hold that the Louisiana segregation statute is constitutional, that they can allow separate facilities for the separate races. What this is going to establish is the precedent known as separate but equal for blacks and whites. And they can do this as long as the accommodations were in fact equal. The separate but equal doctrine gets extended very quickly to include just about every aspect of their life: restaurants, theaters, restrooms, and schools. And it's not going to be challenged again until 1954. So from 1899 to 1954, Southern blacks are going to be completely entrenched in this Jim Crow South, where they're going to be held down at every corner. The Brown v. Board decision is finally going to break that, but it's over 50 years later. Take a look at this picture right here. This is supposed to depict a separate but equal facility. This is by no means equal whatsoever. Maybe it's equal water coming out of the pipe, but you can see the white side is all nice cast iron, and the black side or colored side is this very kind of old school looking, poorly constructed drinking fountain. You can see here again the Rex Theater for colored people. These are just a few examples for you to look at. Here's another one, the Hotel Clark, the best service for colored only. And you can see here in this picture, colored waiting room, and then also imagine that, Coca-Cola, white customers only, 6 cents for a Coke. So let's recap. You should have been able to describe the different measures that were taken to disenfranchise African Americans. We have the poll tax, the literacy test, and the grandfather clause, and also evaluate the importance of the separate but equal doctrine and the impact that it had on the first half of the 20th century. After this Plessy versus Ferguson decision, African American people are really going to be handicapped in the advancement of anything. They couldn't get equal jobs, equal pay, couldn't vote, and it really doesn't get challenged again until 1954 with the Brown v. Board decision, which we'll cover in the second semester. So if you have any questions, send me an email, let me know, find me in class. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.